How do you follow that? Absolutely brilliant. I love to travel with Abdu for two reasons. Number one, whatever he says is so cogent and so tightly put together. Number two, you witness a miracle. You get all that counsel from a lawyer and no bill. How do you like that? All that stuff, so good. Really, really well said. And having said that, I'm going to, first of all, express my thanks to the hosts here at the university and all of those who worked so hard behind the scenes. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for making us feel so welcome. We've been traveling a lot, and you can probably hear it in my voice. I've been doing an awful lot of speaking in the recent weeks. If you ask me where I've been in the last 3 to 4 weeks, I'm not sure I can remember. All I know is tomorrow night I head to the UK, and then day after tomorrow to the UAE, and then so on and so forth. By the time I come back home, I look at my wife and we first shake hands before we hug each other so that we know we are indeed the same people. But to come to this university, I think this is the first time I've been here. I've been to several in the neighborhood, but thank you to all of you at this university for inviting us. We are truly honored. I'm going to begin with 3 short, humorous stories, and no offense intended to anyone, so please wait till I finish before you see why I'm even telling you these 3 little anecdotes. The story is told of a man who was wanting to know what his little toddler would become when he grew up. And so a psychologist told him, just at the coffee table in your living room, put a bottle of wine, put the Wall Street Journal and the Bible, and watch when he goes to the coffee table to see what he will take first. If he takes the Wall Street Journal, he could become a business person. If he takes that bottle of wine, well, he could become a pleasure-loving hedonist or whatever. If he takes the Bible, he could well go into the ministry. So place them and watch him. So the little guy walks over to the table, looks at all 3. He takes the bottle of wine, tucks it under his arm, picks up the Wall Street Journal, holds it with one hand, and the Bible in the other, and walks away. And the father slaps his shoulder and says, oh no, he's going to become a politician. All 3. First illustration. Second one. A lawyer, a rabbi, and a sadhu, that is a Hindu holy man, were going on a pilgrimage together. And as they were walking at sunset, they were walking past a farm, and they felt tired, so they said, let's go in and see if we can get a room for the night. So they go in, and the farmer says, you know, guys, I'll give you a room, but I only have 2 beds. There's a barn. One of you will have to sleep in the barn. And if 2 of you want to take the beds and one in the barn, you can have it. So I said, okay. So the Hindu sadhu said, you know, you guys live lives of luxury. I'm a very austere man. I'll go to the barn. So he goes to the barn, and 2 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. And the sadhu says, look, there's some cows there, and I don't think I really want to be disrespectful and sleep in the same barn with the cows out there. So the rabbi says, I don't know about your belief. I'll go and sleep in the barn. So he goes. 2 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. And they say, you know, guys, there's some pigs out there, and I don't think I can really sleep with the pigs in the barn. So the lawyer says, you guys are crazy about your religion. I'll go and sleep there. So he goes to the barn. And 2 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. It's the cows and the pigs. Third story. There's this young Jewish lad. There's a Protestant lad and a Catholic lad going past, and they see a house of ill repute across the road. And so they say, let's just stand here, see who goes in. So as they're waiting for a few minutes, all of a sudden, they see a rabbi going in there. And the other 2 guys look at him and say, look, 10 commandments and all that, but look where he's going. So the young Jewish lad didn't know what to say. Another 5 minutes go, and a Protestant minister is walking in there. And the other two guys look at him and say, look, Beatitudes, walk with God, and look where he's going. Another 5 minutes go by, and a Catholic priest walks in there. And the young Catholic lad says, somebody must be really sick in there. Now, why did I tell you those? To offend particular callings? No. But what is it about a politician? They are makers of laws. And when they violate those laws, we are quick to jump on them. What is it about lawyers? They interpret the laws. They are supposed to defend the laws. And when they monkey around with it and manipulate it, we all think of them as doing something wrong with the institution that they're intended to protect. And what is it about ministers? They talk about a law above the laws, a supreme law that transcends any earthly law. And when they go and do something like that, the rest of the world says, what? You're a hypocrite. You see, the charge of hypocrisy unwittingly is a compliment that vice pays to virtue. The charge of hypocrisy is an unwitting compliment that vice pays to virtue. We all know deep inside that one of the worst things you can say to someone is, you're a hypocrite. Because that stings, that doesn't only attack the person, that actually ends up attacking the very belief system of the person. And so I say to you that no matter how much we talk about truth, how much we talk about the possibility of truth, when it comes down to it, we all realize we had dare not challenge the notion of truth, because the worst thing you can call someone is a hypocrite, which means that person is being untruthful in what it is they actually claim to believe. The man who popularized the phrase, God is dead, Friedrich Nietzsche, whose father was a pastor, and both of his grandfathers being in the ministry, made this comment: the real truth about objective truth is that the latter is a fiction. Every candidate for truth must first be expressed in language, and language is notoriously unable to get us to reality. Words, like a hall of mirrors, reflect only each other, and in the end point back to the condition of their users without having established anything about the way things really are. Truth is the name we give to that which agrees with our own instinctive preferences. It is what we call our interpretation of the world, especially when we want to foist it upon others. And then this staggering statement, but I too am still too pious, and even I worship at the altar where God's name is truth. He could not live with the exclusivity of what he was actually asserting, but then came to an exclusive conclusion. Nietzsche said this: one may sometimes tell a lie, but the grimace that accompanies it tells the truth. One may sometimes tell a lie, but the grimace that accompanies it tells the truth. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, if any society really came to the belief that there is no such thing as truth, which is what we are flirting with here in the West, calling it the post-truth culture in which we now live, is that a truthful statement? You may as well talk about a one-ended stick than to deny that truth actually doesn't exist. That very statement makes an affirmation of something you claim to be true. Let me give you 4 other simple illustrations on this. In your own life, when you are the victim of a lie, it will sting so badly that the years may go by and you will recognize that you were wronged by something that was not true. Let me give you a very simple illustration. It's almost laughable now, but boy, did it ever sting when it happened to me. I was at one of the colleges in Delhi University where I was studying, and we used to sit on stools, and when the professor walked in, we always had to stand up, and then we would sit down on the stools. There were no backs to it. And as the professor came in and we stood up and we were about to sit down, the guy next to me with his foot moved the stool of the fellow in front of him. And he was crashing to the ground. I leaned over just in time to get the stool to try and put it back in place. I didn't make it, and all the professor saw was my hand on the stool and that guy on the ground. And he looked at me and said, "Zacharias, get out." I said, "But get out." He never gave me a chance to even make a defense of that. That was 55 years ago. And it still bothers me, that I was kicked out of the class because that guy took the stool out from the person in front of him. And you know what I did walking? I consoled myself, well, there are probably many things I did that I never got caught for, so it's okay. This one had to balance the whole thing out. When it happens to you personally, what about when it happens in justice? Then it's not just you. Some years ago, I went to see a man in prison whom I'd known as a friend. He was charged with something pretty heinous. And as he spends his time in prison, he vows that it was an absolute lie that got him in there. A few weeks after he was put into prison, I went to see him. I'll never forget the moment. Of course, you give your cell phones, you give your ID, you do all of that stuff. And I walked through 3 iron doors, one after another, past 3 sets of guards, and then sat across a glass from him. I didn't even recognize him. Only a few days had gone by. He was not even a shadow of himself. He is still in prison and will probably never get out because he's in his 70s and was given a 35-year sentence. I looked at him and I couldn't say anything as the tears kept running down my face. He comes with ankle irons and with his handcuffs. And he says, "I swear to you, I never, ever did what I'm being accused of. I promise you that." And those who worked in prisons will tell you they make a mistake maybe 1 or 2% or more of the time. If you are falsely charged with a lie, what do you do then? What if you're incarcerated for something you never did? You will desperately want the truth. In fact, that's what the whole story of the Count of Monte Cristo is about. A man who was falsely charged and then ultimately made his way out and spent the rest of his life trying to avenge. In your own life, or in the pursuit of justice, or in the reality of war, think of how intelligence experts foil methods by spreading a lie. The Second World War at one point hinged on a moment. It's written in the book called The Man Who Never Was. How this ruse of a guy who was thrown into the waters, he had died of pneumonia, floated over onto the coast of Spain. They knew the Nazis would get the body, and in his uniform they had stuffed all kinds of information of a move they were going to make and where they were going to attack in Italy. And the Nazis bought into that lie. It had nothing to do with the truth. But then they said, how do we know this is not a false setup? But they examined the lungs, and there was water in the lungs, and it happened to be that the intelligence people knew they would look into the lungs, and they found a person who had pneumonia with water in the lungs, so it looked like he had actually drowned, and they believed the whole story. And all of the German artillery was moved to a different spot to try and protect this that was made as a plan, and it wasn't a plan at all. Think of how many hundreds of thousands of lives even one little twist of the truth can make. But now this is it, and this is where I want to lean. What is it about the truth that is so important to you and to me? And why is the exclusivity of the truth so ineradicably etched into the very law of non-contradiction? Here is what Malcolm Muggeridge said years ago. In this Sargasso sea of fantasy and fraud, how can I or anyone else hope to swim unencumbered? How can I learn to see through and not with the eye? How can I take off my own motley, wash away the makeup, raise the iron shutter, put out the studio lights, silence the sound effects, and put the cameras to sleep? Will I ever watch the sunrise on Sunset Boulevard and set over Forest Lawn? Find furniture among the studio props, silence in a discotheque, love in a striptease, read truth of an auto cue, catch it on a screen or chase it on the wings of Muzak, view it in living color with the news, hear it in living sound along the motorways. No, not in the wind that rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks, not in the earthquake that followed, nor in the fire that followed the earthquake. It is in that still small voice, not in the screeching of tires either, or in the grinding of brakes, or the roar of jets, or the whistle of sirens, or the howl of trombones, the rattle of drums, or the chanting of demo voices. Again and again, it is that still small voice I long for, that voice of God, if one could only catch it. Professor Nicholas Walter Storff, philosopher from Yale, who lost his son in a hiking accident some years ago. Walter Storff, well known to any student in philosophy, writes some of the best books to read in philosophical thinking. When he gets that knock on the door or the phone call to tell him that his son in his early 20s was found as a corpse in his hiking days, it crushed him, and he wrote a book called Lament for a Son. It's a powerful book, and he goes on to say, when all of the chasms have been crossed, when we can conquer heat with air conditioning, when we can conquer distances with jet planes and all of these, he said there will still be two realities we'll have to deal with: the evil in our hearts and death. When everything else has been conquered, when everything else is known or understood, the evil in your heart and mine and the reality of death that we face. And so my challenge to you this evening is this: how did we get to even asking this question? Is spiritual truth exclusive? You know how we got here? We got here through three moods over the last 50 years in the West. And the fascinating thing is today, if you go to even China, they're trying to hark back to their moralist philosophers like Confucius and so on. If you go to India, they're trying to dig their heels deeper into their pantheistic worldviews, as are other countries. We in the West, who prospered by certain presuppositions, were blessed immensely in believing in absolutes and values, where the Judeo-Christian worldview has had its impact. We are the ones questioning whether spiritual truth really is valid, and can these really be true? And if we don't answer this question correctly, may I suggest to you, the days of Western culture as we have known it will no longer have any future, and I'll tell you why. Three moods came about: secularization, pluralization, and privatization. Secularization moved us through a process where religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations lost their social significance. Please hear it again. Where religious ideas lost their social significance in our Western culture. And when you think about that, you think of the very mottos with which we live and with which we exist. I happened to speak at the first Veritas Forum at Harvard University. I think it was either 92 or 93. And the motto of Harvard, of course, is Veritas. And I understand that in the early days it was Veritas Christo e Ecclesia, truth for Christ and the church. There are 3 major universities with the motto, the truth shall set you free. You go to those universities and ask an average student what precedes these words in the words of Jesus. You will very rarely get an answer. If you abide in my word, you are my disciples. Then you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. We have become so secularized that we don't even know from whence we gain our maxims. The motto at Oxford University, the Lord is my light. Wow. The Lord is my light. Ask an average student there how free you can be to hold on to your Christian convictions in any public proclamation or a public statement. Religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. What happened as a result? What happened as a result is we now are in the quicksand of moral reasoning where we no longer know how to define what shame is legitimate and what shame is illegitimate. My daughter Naomi works in rescuing women and children from the sex trafficking industry. A few weeks ago, I was talking to an 18-year-old young man in a particular city that I'll leave unnamed. And his father had contacted me because his son was struggling with suicide. I came to know Christ on a bed of suicide in Delhi when I was 17 years old. And so he said, would you please talk to my son? So I called his son, and I said to him, as we were chatting, very articulate, very gracious young man. And then I said, can I ask you when this sense of hopelessness came? He said, yeah, I can tell you when. I said, when was that? He said, when I got into pornography. I said, wow. I said, how old were you when you got into pornography? Are you ready for this? He said, I was 8 years old. I was 8 years old. Think of the industry today that dehumanizes men and women in the process of titillating feelings and responses, which actually lodges in the mind of a person the impossibility of any one human being to ever satisfy them. That's what it does, because it invades the imagination through the back door of pictures where you're actually looking at a form such and such that it would affect possibly your marriage with serious consequences, because it is no longer a person you love, it is a feeling you're pursuing. And so secularization, having gone into the quicksand of not being able to define moral reasoning, we cannot define it anymore. And that is just one simple illustration I give to you. But then we move to pluralization. And when pluralization took place, we have a competing number of worldviews available to its members, and no one worldview is dominant. This is where the question of religious truth actually comes in. A competing number of worldviews with no particular worldview being dominant. How do we find out in a pluralistic culture? Hear me carefully, please. What is worth conserving from the past? Because culture is really part of a collective memory and collective values with shared meanings of the past. Collective memory, collective values with shared meaning from the past. So secularization moved us into the quicksand of no moral reasoning. Pluralization is moving us into the quicksand of the loss of logical reasoning. How do we arrive at the truth anymore? How do we know what is true? As Abdu has so clearly stated. You see, many of these worldviews have wonderful ideas to share, but the claims of Jesus are very unique. For example, Buddhism is non-theistic, if not atheistic. It is non-theistic, if not atheistic. Today, A former Buddhist, early in the morning, wrote to me and said, "Can you help me understand a little more of the person of God and who He is and what His characters are?" She herself had given her life to Christ and saw the difference. Secularization led to loss of moral reasoning. Pluralization led to the loss of logical reasoning, which led to privatization. And this is where higher education will have some big questions to answer God for. We have evicted God from the education process. You know, why is it called a university? Because it was intended to bring unity in diversity. And why did the Greeks bring it about? Because they were looking for episteme, the truth from where we get epistemology. And the fact of the matter is, abstract reasoning stops with abstract propositions. A personal, moral first cause places personal, moral value upon your life and mine. And so, what is the breaking point? The breaking point really comes down to this. How are you going to find meaning if there is no truth in spiritual matters? You're not going to find it just by being a good physicist or a good doctor or a good, even for that matter, metaphysician. I remember a student in Burlington, Ontario, stood up and said to me, he said, "I'm a scientist, as science is the queen of the disciplines. And I believe that's all we really need. We don't need anything more than that." I said, "That's fascinating." I said, "What of the pure sciences gives you the imperative to tell the truth about your findings? What in the pure sciences gives you the imperative to tell the truth in your findings?" I said, "That's not physics now, that's metaphysics. You're moving into ethical theory and ethical reasoning." When Stephen Hawking wrote his last book, somewhere I think around page 8 or something, he made the comment, "Philosophy is dead. Philosophy is dead." What an incredible statement. Theologians didn't have to respond to him. The whole philosophy department went after him. And the chairman of the philosophy department at Cambridge said, "Maybe somebody needs to tell the oracular Professor Hawking that he has not kept up as much with our discipline as we have with his." Maybe somebody needs to tell the oracular Professor Hawking that he has not kept up with our discipline as much as we have with his. Do you know, the man was cared for and brilliant. I heard him a couple of times in his lectures. He always apologized for his American accent because he used to speak through a voice synthesizer developed by, I think, Caltech or somewhere like that. He had a good sense of humor. It was people who loved him and cared for him and believed in the notion of supererogatory acts of loving someone who could not even return it to him. Love is a supreme ethic that actually keeps people alive when long ago they could have been buried and gone. Where does that come from? I want to summarize 4 sets of propositions, and I'll close. It is this. See, there are 4 questions you have to answer in your life. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. That forms your worldview. And when you look for the truth, can I tell you something? It is only Jesus Christ who gave us the handmaiden of truth. It's grace. The law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Truth without grace is arrogant. Grace without truth is mere sentimentality. You have to have the twin forces of grace and truth. Here are the 4 sets of propositions. In our origin, God tells us He created us with intrinsic worth and having a reflective splendor. Intrinsic worth and having a reflective splendor. This is the only point I want to illustrate. The rest I will just read for you. Follow me carefully. A man came to Jesus and asked him a question. Is it all right to pay taxes to Caesar? I wish so much Jesus had said no. It's just wonderful. So happy on April 15th to be godly and rebellious at the same time. Jesus said to him, do you have a coin? He said, yes. He said, give it to me. He shows him the coin. He says, whose image is on this coin? The man said, Caesar. Give to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and give to God that which belongs to God. The man should have had a follow-up question. You know what the follow-up question should have been? What belongs to God? And you know what Jesus would have said? Whose image is on you? You give to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar. You give to God that which belongs to God. No other worldview pays you that compliment, that you have a reflective splendor in Imago Dei. Secondly, he gives us in the origin unity of worship and diversity in forms. We don't all worship with the same kind of music or the same kind of expression, but we have the unity of focus to which we are called. Thirdly, the stewardship over creation, but the sovereignty of the Creator. Fourthly, autonomy of the individual with theonomy in life. That's in origin. Then in our existence, we rejected his sovereignty and felt shame from within by attacking the very image of God, and we became restless wanderers. The third set of propositions: God raised up a deliverer, God provides the miracle of freedom, God gave us the law to love the law, and God told us something very critical. It is only redemption that precedes righteousness. You can never be righteous without being redeemed. The truth of the matter is, when you are redeemed, you love God not because you earn your salvation. You love God because you love to serve him, and the actions you show are an expression of your love for him, not as a means to earn your righteousness. At age 17, in Delhi, as a struggling student in a culture of shame and honor, when I knew I was failing, the only hope I had was to exit this world quietly. I tried to take my own life. After the examinations in India, you have the highest rate of suicide that week all over the country. Any Indian in the audience will tell you that. You cannot afford to be a failure in that highly competitive culture. So I lay in that hospital room, dehydrated, tried to poison myself and didn't succeed. When the Bible was brought to me, which I never owned and I couldn't hold, I read the words of Jesus, because I live, you also shall live. And it followed the verse of Jesus telling Thomas, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me. Thomas is the one who took the gospel to India. The exclusive claim of Christ made absolute sense to me, because truth, by definition, is exclusive. And you know what? The secular-minded person knows it, but is unwilling to admit it. So let me close with this illustration, with this quotation written many years ago by a psychologist in the Atlantic Monthly. He interviewed scores of people on how they were finding happiness, and he closes with this, talking to a couple called Abby and Mark. If you feel it is imperative to fill all your needs then, and if all these needs are contradictory or in conflict with those of others, or simply unfillable, then frustration inevitably follows. To Abby and Mark as well, self-fulfillment means having a career and marriage and children and sexual freedom and autonomy and being liberal and having money and choosing nonconformity and insisting on social justice and enjoying city life and country living and simplicity and graciousness and reading and good friends, and on and on. The individual is not truly fulfilled by becoming ever more autonomous. Indeed, to move too far in this direction is to risk psychosis, the ultimate form of autonomy. The injunction is this: to find oneself, one must lose oneself, contains the truth any seeker of self-fulfillment needs to grasp. To find oneself, one must lose oneself. That is the truth any seeker of truth needs to grasp. It is Jesus who tells you, if anyone comes to me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. In return, he gives to you the life that God alone can give, and the total fulfillment that comes from knowing your Creator, where love is the supreme ethic, and the image of God gives you intrinsic worth and reflective splendor. No other worldview gives that to you. Thank you, and God bless you.